Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Amy, for that great intro. And thank you, everyone, for taking some time with me today, talking a little bit about reversing the budget conversation. And as Amy mentioned, my name is Russ. I'm the Chief Experience Officer at PayScale. Why should you care about anything I have to say about compensation, or indeed anything PayScale has to say about compensation? Well, the best part about my job is I get to talk to all of our amazing clients, and we do have quite a few. So today we have over 10,000 clients, both in the United States, but also internationally. If you were to add up all the employees loading data into our various platforms, it's something like, I don't know, it's like 32 million employees, which is about 30% of the US workforce. And if you add up all those salaries, it's like $1.7 trillion. So it's a huge responsibility. It's something we take very seriously, but it also is a pretty cool job because I get to talk to all these amazing employers. Over half of them are in the Fortune 500. So get to talk about the challenging problems they're seeing in compensation and total rewards and in HR, and how we can help solve those. But then I get to do things like this and share with you guys some of those things we're learning. And one of the things that's always sort of been fundamental to what we think about, and I know a lot of our clients think about, and why they choose our software, is because we believe a few fundamental things about compensation. One of them is that the world is changing, and compensation is really moving from a back office function, right? Something that people used to think about like accounting, and turning into more of a strategic function in your organization. And to be strategic, you really need data. And if you are strategic with compensation, you're really going to have a big advantage. And the reason we think you're going to have that advantage is because when you think about the three sort of fundamental pillars that every executive and board of directors member or anyone else thinks about when they think about their organization, they think about three things, right? They think about profit. And what's your largest expense? Well, probably payroll. When you think about risk, what's your biggest unexpected risk? Well, probably turnover. And when you think about growth, how can you grow responsibly without understanding the cost of labor in that new market or that new geography? And so when you think about the intersection of profit, risk, and growth, it really is compensation that's a big part of that story. And one of the things we do know is that most organizations do not have a talent strategy or a compensation strategy. In fact, according to the predictive index, only 36% of businesses have a talent strategy. And of those, only 12% of them align them to a business strategy. So when I think about that, what that really means is that if you have a talent strategy, if you have a compensation strategy that you can align to business strategy, you're going to have an advantage on 88% of the businesses in the market. And as we all know, with the amount of resignations going on now and the amount of talent crisis that a lot of folks are experiencing, that's a big deal. So how do you build a talent strategy? How do you actually even think about being strategic when it's with something like compensation, right? Well, when you think about being strategic, it really comes down to some basic elements. First of all, you have to be able to communicate the problem. You have to be able to tie the problem to business goals. You have to be able to do a self-assessment. You have to be able to do a market assessment. And then you have to bring all that stuff together, right, and create a strategic go-forward proposal. And this is the part that's really tricky. The title of today's presentation, right, was how do you reverse the budget process? And what do I mean by that? Well, any of you in total rewards or compensation, you kind of know the process is really this, right? The CFO comes out of their office, right? She comes down the stairs with her tablets, and she says, we've done a lot of research, and it turns out that after doing all of our research, you're going to get a 3% pool for your merit increases this year. Good luck with that. Right? Well, that doesn't work. Right? We all know that doesn't really work. And so for that to change, we have to get to the CFO before that conversation occurs and help them understand what really needs to change. And you need all of these different elements of a strategic proposal to be able to do that. So how do you start with something as big as this, right? Well, the first thing is don't try to boil the ocean. Make sure you choose a specific problem, a problem that's going to have direct business impact, a problem that's going to have some urgency to it. One of the things that leaders tend to really do is if a problem's been hanging around a long time, a business is still functioning, they kind of like, well, why should I worry about it now, right? So having urgency is really important. And then also, if you can be proactive, it's also better. It's more strategic to be proactive than reactive, right? And so as we think about this, right, we think about the timeliness and what's going on in the world right now, what should we pick as we think about an example? Because I'd love to walk through an example with you guys today on how we might put together a strategic proposal. Well, when thinking about what to pick for today's session, I looked through a lot of different information we got from talking to clients, right? So I mentioned that amazing pool of clients. We do a lot of meetups and talk with clients and let clients sort of vote on what they'd like to chat about. And so over the course of 2021, I got a chance to meet with over 300 clients. And in talking to them, I'd ask them questions like, what do you want to talk about today? What's top of mind for you? And looking at those questions, we found out that how do you defend market data, right? The data sources you have today, that's their number one problem. Pretty much going into 2021 in particular was a big problem, as you might imagine. Number two, how do we take care of remote workers? Number three was pay compression. And number four was pay equity. Now, what's interesting, and then also the last one was also merit planning with deferred merit. That came up a lot in the beginning of the year because in 2020, right, a lot of merit was deferred. And folks were like, now what do we do? We're kind of a year behind on merit increases. So 3% is definitely not going to work, right? So that was a big topic as well. So as we look at these sorts of things, what do they all have in common? Well, if we kind of put a pin in the first one, how to defend market data, we'll come back to that one. But the rest of these all have one thing in common. First of all, you got to be proactive to mitigate these sorts of things. They're not the sort of thing you can react to very easily. Pay equity, pay compression, dealing with remote workers. I mean, I know we kind of reacted to remote workers, right? But it was hard. It'd be much easier if we kind of knew it was coming. Secondly, you need a long-range strategy to really do these things right. And third, they need a budget, right? As I mentioned earlier, that 3% increase isn't going to really cut it. And so in thinking about which one of these things maybe we could talk about today, pay equity, pay compression, maybe remote workers, or merit planning, I thought that pay compression really makes a lot of sense. One, it's underappreciated. Two, it's a growing need. We'll talk more about that in a bit. And the best thing about pay compression is it's hits so many business practices or compensation best practices that we do every day. And if your organization isn't doing these kinds of best practices, well, that's probably one of the reasons that pay compression is even more of a problem than it might has to be. The other thing about pay compression that's kind of fun is it's a hard one, right? So normally when the teacher gives you an example in class and then you go to do your homework, the example is always way easier than the homework problem. So I thought it'd be kind of fun in class today to actually pick what I consider one of the harder problems to solve, which is actually pay compression. All right, so back to our list of things to do, right? We want to communicate the problem is step one. So how do we communicate the problem of pay compression? Well, I know a lot of you guys on the call today are comp professionals and total reward professionals, but even knowing that, I'm going to take a moment and explain to all of you how I would position what pay compression is to a leader or an executive, because it's really important. Even if you think your audience knows this stuff, I would expect they don't, and take a moment to kind of walk them through it. So what is pay compression, right? Well, it's really pretty simple. If we have a very simple salary structure, and here's a very simple example. Here's my trivial example, right? We got a set of warehouse workers. We got our junior level employee making $14 an hour. We got a slightly more senior employee making $15.40 an hour. We got a more specialized role there making like $16.94 an hour. And then you got the manager making $20, a little more than $20 an hour, right? That's sort of where we hope everybody falls, right? But then, of course, what happens? Well, one of the historical causes of pay compression is suddenly there's a very in-demand skill, and you just got to start hiring that person and get them on the floor, whatever it costs. Let's say all of a sudden forklift operators are really valuable and hard to get. And maybe you got to start spending $19 an hour on a forklift operator. Well, if you were to do that just to get them on the floor to solve the problem, what have you done? Well, now you've compressed, right, the difference between your specialized role and your manager from 20% down to 7%. I know we've got a really simple example here. Another cause of this sort of thing is the increasing cost of entry-level labor, which historically is caused by minimum wage increases, but lately it's just been caused by market pressure, tough finding talent, and a bunch of reasons. A lot of people just staying home because of COVID. And so whatever the cost of entry-level labor is going way up. So we just got to pay whatever it takes to fill those roles. So now our junior level person is coming in at less than a 3% delta to the more senior person. And so now the more senior person is like, wait a minute, I've been here 5 years, just brought this guy in, basically making my same salary. Maybe I should go across the street and start driving for Amazon, right? And so those are the kind of things that cause these problems, right? And here's where these simple examples really help, because you'd be surprised the number of leaders who just say, well, just tell me the total cost of raising all our entry-level guys to $15 an hour and we'll be fine. And they don't understand that, well, to really correct the problem, right, you got to push everybody up throughout the chain. It's not simply look at one job and figure out what the delta would be. So those are some of the causes, and those causes are myriad, right? So if you think about all the external causes driving this sort of stuff, there's the desire to stay remote, and how do you handle the fact that people might be moving? And if you increase someone or you don't decrease someone when they move from New York to a rural area, now you got a pay compression issue with those sorts of folks. There's increasing unemployment benefits. I mean, the list goes on and on. And for the interest of time, I'm not going to go through them all. But of course, you guys get a copy of these slides. So you have the list of all the things that are driving the problem, right? So the important thing here is as we communicate this problem, in this case, pay compression, right? We're telling two things. We're explaining clearly what it is, but also in explaining it in this simple example, we're also giving urgency, right? We're telling them why it's important and difficult right now, right? And it's actually even getting worse, right? So step one, we have communicated the problem. All right, now we got to tie it to business goals, right? And this part's a little trickier because as we think about tying this particular problem to business goals, it's hard for me to give you an example that works for any company carte blanche because we're all different, right? The key here is to figure out what is really a challenge for your organization. What are some of the specific targets this year? And as you're thinking about building the strategic proposal, figuring out, okay, how do the goals of my company this year, are they going to be impacted if we don't fix pay compression, right? So again, what's top of mind for your team? What are some of the regional challenges? Kind of ask yourself these questions to sort of figure it out. We just did a big end of year webinar this past fall, and we asked comp professionals what was challenging for them to deal with in 2021. This is sort of interesting, right? So if you're like most of these businesses, the number one challenge they're facing right now is retention, right? 46% of the almost 500 people on the call said retention was the number one challenge. Not really a surprise. But check out the number 21%, the rising cost of entry-level labor, which means if they're increasing their cost of entry-level labor, they're now creating compression. And then compression itself got 8%. So I would argue that retention, the rising cost of entry-level labor, and compression are all adding together to create more compression. So compression really could be considered something closer to like 80% of your problem here, right? Or at least 60%. So why is it now? Well, again, we all know why it's now, but it's even more crazy when you think about, according to Bureau of Labor Statistics, about a third of US jobs that have been lost in 2021 have yet to be replaced. So there's a huge problem in the labor market, as you guys all know. Many of these organizations, these industries, it's manufacturing, it's healthcare, it's hospitality, have all been hit hard by the Great Resignation. And if you think your organization is really thinking about, well, we've got a resignation problem, right? We've got a retention problem. How do we solve this? Well, pay compression's really going to, if you don't have a good handle on pay compression, you're really going to start losing some of your key roles, right? Your more junior employees are going to be making as much as your more senior employees. So your more senior employees are going to be at risk, and your managers are going to be at risk. And so basically your best labor, your most skilled labor, your most talented labor is what you're putting at risk if you don't fix those compression issues. And so looking at your skilled labor, which you can least afford to lose, that should tie to your business goals and how you make that case. So we've communicated the problem and we've tied it to business goals. In this case, really thinking about retention in this particular case and how those particular retention issues might affect your key or anchor jobs. Now it's time for a self-assessment. Now, to do a self-assessment, there's a bunch of different ways you can do that. So how do you kind of identify and respond to compression? Well, another bit of data for you guys here. I'm not going to read through all these things, but you can take this slide home with you. When we had these meetups throughout the course of 2021, and we had geographic meetups, we had industry-related meetups with different total rewards and HR leaders from across the country. And we talked about compression quite a bit. And when we did, these were sort of some of the things that those folks said they were doing, right, to identify and respond to pay compression. And if you look at these, the ones with the arrows next to them, they're all compensation best practices. And many of them are really around being proactive, but also having a good structure process and being able to understand where all your folks fall internally, but also against market, right? So how do I think about this? Well, the way I like to set this up is I like a horizontal view. So this is a very simple sort of way to think about how you can look at your pay compression. There are great tools for this in the market, but also you can build it yourself with Excel. But whatever you do, here's sort of the key data elements you need to kind of bring together to really make sort of the situation plain when you're presenting this to leadership, right? In this particular case, I like to think about, let's look at a very subset of the job families, right? Like ideally, you could make this sort of case and describe this sort of situation for all the jobs in your organization. But again, back to don't boil the ocean, that's probably a ton of work. If you really know where your key anchor jobs are and those jobs you want to protect, particularly jobs around a specific business, business goal or business objective you're trying to protect. Let's say your software company, that'd be your software engineers, the manufacturing company, maybe it's folks on the floor, whatever. Take a look at those jobs in particular and start to go through this exercise. So take a look at that subset of jobs that's really important to defend. get the data so you can figure out what's the internal average salary for my people in those roles, where's the market on those roles, and then what's the progression look like, right? So between these blue lines, which in my case are my internal salaries, am I starting to push and getting some compression in there? Can I see those sorts of problems? I'm going to evaluate the progression, right? Looking for that problem. And what's interesting about this picture, right, is it ties back to the picture I used earlier about describing compression in general, right? So again, we're framing the problem in one visual, and then we're actually showing our internal challenges in the same visual so that our leadership team can really understand what we're talking about here. And again, with a visual like this, it really makes it clear that just increasing the cost of entry-level labor creates a problem in a bunch of job families down the line, right? And that's really the key part of the compression message. All right, if you're an organization, for example, that maybe doesn't have different job levels for years of experience, like maybe you don't have software developer 1, software developer 2, software developer 3, or whatever, you can also do it with your employees on a row for row, and then sort it by years of experience and kind of do the same sort of visual there too. I like this one as well. I've seen a lot of our clients do it this way. But in any case, the thing you also want to kind of get, the key data elements on this visual are your internal average salary, right? Whatever the last market pricing was, the last time you did it. You want to have any outlier employees clearly identified so you can see where those problems are. And then you kind of, if you can have access to more timely data, you really want to kind of see where the market's moving so you can kind of be predictive. Remember, one of our key points of strategy is not only do you want to be responding to something urgent, but you want to be a little predictive and proactive and protective, right? So if we can, in addition to knowing where everything is right now, if we kind of know where the future's going, that can be helpful really too, if we got that kind of data available to us. All right. So as we're preparing this analysis, right, as we're pulling all this data together, the thing to ask yourself is when you present this to your leadership team, where are they going to poke holes in it, right? Where are you going to get challenged? Because whenever you present a strategy, you feel really good about it, and you go right in there and you're like, I got this. I'm going to get the budget I need. I'm going to really solve a major problem for my organization. And then sure enough, they poke something. Well, the thing they always poke, always, is the data, which is why defending market data, in my opinion, was the number one thing that our folks were asking us about way back in the beginning of the presentation when we were talking about what's the thing that's top of mind that you need to sort of take care of. It's defending that market data. So the foundation of any strategy you present, no matter how well thought out it is going to depend on how defensible your data is. And the reason that I'm going to use some data now to show why people attack your data, right? So if you think about how volatile 2020 was, here you can see some data trends we compiled over the course of 2020. As I mentioned earlier, we have all these amazing organizations that are loading their data into our platform, and we really know incumbent counts. And you can see here sort of how the incumbent counts went up and down over the course of 2020, right? Take a look at the huge drop in the airline industry after the lockdowns occurred. Look at the big increases in diversity hiring, for example, after the events of the summer of 2020, right? So we can see that geopolitical events, we can see obviously that the global pandemic really had different effects on different job families. And this is why your leadership team is going to challenge you if you don't have some access to current market data as well. So you're going to want to make sure when you're looking at data sources, in addition to your tried and true surveys that are once a year and maybe a year old, you're also going to want to have maybe some non-traditional data sources as well that can bring more current data to bear. So you can really kind of be able to say, hey, I know what's going on back then, but I also have more current stuff to handle what's happening right now. And I have another slide in here. I'm going to skip it into time, but you can see some of the more specific job families, how they really spiked due to the events of COVID. One other set of data I kind of wanted to share with you guys was some of the job families we're seeing decline over the course of 2021. So remember, I mentioned earlier, we have this amazing data set from all of our clients. And since the beginning of 2021, we took a look at a bunch of job families that the clients were in with our job families for the entire year. And we said, where are those job families where the total number of incumbents at the end of the year were less than the total number of incumbents at the beginning of the year, i.e., these are the job families where people have not been rehired back. There's less of them doing the job today than there was at the beginning of the year in the same organizations, right? Does that make sense? So this is really interesting because this is sorted by the jobs with the highest amount of, loss to the lowest. And these job families are pretty significant job families, and they're job families that normally are thought of as pretty well-respected, like sciences, the trades, insurance, engineering, human resources. So these are all really important roles, right? And their healthcare, they're all down. So again, just another point in the in the strategic summary here that it's really important to retain your talent, and you're really going to have to take a look at what you're doing to solve these problems to keep your talent. And the war is only going to get stronger as we go forward. Some more data you might want to share with the leadership team. These are some of the current trends we've seen in the last 6 months around base 50th comp changes, right? So what you're looking at here in the top half of my screen, and this is just the United States, these are the list of the jobs that are having the biggest increase to base 50th in the last 6 months. And below that, it's the list of jobs that are having the largest decrease in base 50th in the last 6 months. And you can also see the regions of the United States that are having these changes as well, right? So where are folks paying more on average and where are folks paying less on average? And in the bottom half, you can see that I drilled in just for the Mid-Atlantic for you guys, so you can kind of see what the jobs there are and how that's different than the rest of the nation as well. So again, I don't have time to go through all these things, but again, some nice data for you, and you'll get these slides after the session. You can jump into that as well. So how does one go about defending their market data? Again, these are some of the techniques that we're hearing from our clients at our various meetups, and a lot of them tie into the kind of data I showed you, but really it comes down to transparency. In other words, where does your data come from? How timely is your data? Are you able to drill into specific geographies? Do you have a variety of data sources that we can depend upon? And do you have good focus? Can we actually talk about the kind of companies that you're getting data from? Are they companies like us, right? Are they in similar situations? Does it make a lot of sense? Or is it just, an overall big market picture, right? All right, whew. So we've communicated the problem. We've tied it to business goals. We've done our self-assessment. We've included a market assessment in there with all that great trend data. Now it's time to put together our final pitch to hopefully switch that here's your budget process and actually get to the CFO with a budget request first. Just as a quick reminder and a summary, to prepare that pitch, the first thing you want to do is go ahead and explain that problem clearly. Again, the way you explain the problem, if you frame it properly, you're going to be able to go ahead and when you frame your internal sort of self-assessment, it can align to the problem and make it more sense. Secondly, make sure you tie it to some clear business goals. I gave the example today of retention. You may have different business goals in your organization, but about a little bit of thought, you can figure out some really good ways that getting pay right and getting compression solved will really make it easier for your company to achieve its objectives. Third, that internal assessment, and again, it should look like the way you position the problem, and so you can show where those clear problems are. And that assessment should include your internal self-assessment along with a market assessment, right? Fourth, make sure you have good data transparency. Here's some examples of things that you want to make sure you have available for data transparency: the sources, the sizes, which geography we're talking about. Can you get into the details of which organizations were involved? And finally, make sure you have a great strategic proposal to go forward. What are you pitching the budget should be now? You've just said the problem. What are we going to spend? Which jobs are we going to fix? Which jobs are we not going to try to fix right now because they're less critical for us at the moment? What's the time horizon? And what do we think the ROI is going to be if we do this, right? How is it going to help us with retention? I know I packed a lot in the last 23 or so minutes, but we got a couple minutes left here. A couple things while we take a look at our Q&A list. If we have any questions, go ahead and type them in the chat. We'll try to get to a couple of them. If you're looking for additional resources, a couple places you can go. We do have a free podcast called Comp and Coffee that I happen to host. If you'd like to hear more about that, if you're like me and you're a total comp nerd, feel free. Also, we just published our 2022 compensation best practices reports. You can see all kinds of amazing data in there. It's the largest and longest running report of its kind. And if you really want to know what organizations are doing around compensation, definitely check that out. You just go to payscale.com for more information there. So Amy, we got a couple moments left here. Any questions we can jump in on, answer?
I think that you threw a lot of information at people, which was great, but they're digesting, so we haven't gotten any questions in. My guess is that all the questions will come in as people are re-looking over the slides. And remember, you can listen to this again. We'll send out a recording. So if you think about things and you have questions that you ruminate over, I'm sure we can get you in touch with Russ to talk about them. So, here we go. Here is one. How do you explain giving raises to employees without them asking?
Ooh, that's a great way to retain people. Actually, the way you want to do it is again, you go to, do you mean, let me make a couple assumptions here. Do you mean explain to leadership why you're giving raises without them asking? Or do you mean,
what do you tell employees?
I think the employees would appreciate it, right? We've advised before when you go talk to your employees, say, look, we're becoming more proactive Oh, at pay scale, yeah. So we're becoming more proactive. We want to, well, at pay scale, it's a little more interesting. We actually say we want to be an exemplar for how compensation works. We want to be able to let other companies ask us these kinds of questions. And the way we tackle it is really say, look, we want to make sure you're happy, you're treated fairly, that you're paid fairly, that you're paid equitably. And so we're constantly watching the market. And if we see the market adjusts, we're going to want to take care of that for you. You know, there's all kinds of really unfortunate stories about folks being hired, like two people being hired at the same time for the same role. One happens to be a man, one happens to be a woman. They make an offer to both employees. The leader says, hey, I'm offering you 110 for the role. And the guy says, I need 115. He says, okay, I'll take it. And he offers 110 to the woman, and just so they take it. Well, now you've just created a pay disparity. And the correct answer for the woman is, well, you're only asking 110, but we're going to pay you 115 because that's the going rate, right? And so really, I think your employees will appreciate it more, and they'll be less likely to leave if they know you're watching out for them.
Yeah. And then it's sort of a related question. Employees talk, obviously. So what happens when your employees learn that the new folks coming in are making, almost as much as them, or maybe even more than them?
Well, that's why you got to get proactive about compensation and not let that happen. And this is why when a leader says, why don't we just start paying everybody, if the going rate's $15 an hour for entry level labor in our warehouse, just start paying it. And that's when you got to say, well, we can't do that. We could, but people are going to talk, and your veterans are going to realize they're only making $14.50, and they're going to leave. So the correct answer is we have to elevate everyone. And then you have that compression problem, right? So this is why it's becoming a huge problem right now, and why when the cost of entry level labor goes up, you need to take some more thoughtful approach to really resolve the problem.
And I've got a pretty specific question, which may require analysis of your specific industry.
Sure.
What is a reasonable differential to maintain between a first line supervisor and the highest paid position they supervise?
Ooh, I'd have to go look that up. It actually depends on the industry, right? It's different in every
think.
industry and every area. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, so now people's wheels are starting to turn, and they're
Good
getting their
stuff.
questions. Yeah, it's such an interesting issue, because I think so many employers have thought about how do we find new people without thinking about what do we do with the great people that we have that we want to keep.
Yeah, don't lose your great people. That's the first rule.
Yeah. Right. All right. Well, thank you very much, Russ. Very interesting. My guess is we're going to be having you back to talk more about stuff like this.
Awesome. Love to come back. Thank you all for having me.
Okay. Thanks.